Well, hey, this is Pastor Josh from Lighthouse Church. I am so glad that you have chosen to watch a sermon video from our church. If you're a regular attender at Lighthouse and you call Lighthouse your home, I just wanted to say that I love you, that our elders and our leaders are so grateful that you're a part of our church family. And I hope that this sermon just really blesses you and encourages you today as you watch it or as you listen to it as you're driving or whatever it may be. But if you're someone who's not from the Colorado area and you enjoy the content that we create on a weekly basis, first wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being an encouragement to us. But I also wanted to just make two different comments. One, we love that you watch our footage online, but we really want to make sure that you have a local church home that you can call family, that you can be connected to, that you can be a part of. There is no good substitute at all for the church, the body of Jesus Christ. And so please find a local church where you can get connected and loved. And please, enjoy the resources we have as a church here in Colorado, but please find a local church. And the second thing is that if you are someone who enjoys our content, perhaps you would consider giving to our church and generously donating so that way we can continue creating great content for you and for our church. And so I hope you are blessed and encouraged by the word that you're about to hear from one of our elders or from one of my sermons, but be blessed by this video today. Thank you. It's interesting. There's this story that's been told in my family and Brienne's family for the last couple of years, and I just think it's a really beautiful family scenario that took place, and I've always found it to just be something that really stirs my heart whenever I think about it. It was about 4 or 5 years ago now, my wife's cousin, and she's substantially younger than my wife. So my wife's aunt, they had kids and the kids grew up, and then as my wife's aunt and uncle got older, they ended up adopting 2 little girls, and the little girls were obviously substantially younger, and so her cousins were about 15 years younger than her, and so this was about 4 or 5 years ago now. We started noticing, her family started noticing some interesting things about her second oldest of the younger 2 of the cousins. And, she was getting into her 4th, 5th grade years and was an avid reader, like one of those kids that you're like, hey, we're all going out to go biking, or we're gonna go run around the cul-de-sac, we're gonna go have some fun, we're gonna go shopping, and this kid would be like, I just wanna stay home and read, and I just wanna read books, and I wanna write in, coloring books, and she was just like a book nerd and loved these things, loved to learn, loved to be educated, missed not going to school, hated snow days, which is super weird, right? I don't know what kid doesn't like a snow day, one of those kids. And so, she got into the 4th, 5th grade years, and everybody started noticing kind of strange little things happening. She'd be like, hey, I just want to go and read. And so she'd go into their room, and they had a little room where they had a ton of the kids' books in there. And she'd go in, and if you ever went in there when her cousin was reading, you would notice that she was reading super close to the book. And, at first, for me as a human being, watching a little kid read, my son Asher, or my son Ezekiel, he's learning how to read, he's learning his alphabet, and he looks at books really closely. And the reason why he's doing that is because he's trying to see the letters, and he has his finger out, and he's trying to sound out the consonants and vowels, and he's like, yeah, and I'm like, that's pizza, bro, that's not what you do, what are you doing, right? So little kids do that. But 4th and 5th graders don't do that, right? As they get older and their eyes get better and the font gets smaller, they kind of, are just regular. But But she would just grab a book and be in it, right? And it was like, okay, a little bit odd. She just loves books. And, and then like we were over there for a Christmas thing once at their house hanging out. And she came over to talk to me. And she was like, Uncle Josh, come over. And we were chatting a little bit. And I was like, hey, what's up? Like, what do you want to say? What's going on? And she like came up to me, but then she kept coming up to me. And then she got like this close to me and started talking to me. She's like, hi, how are you? And I was just like proximity, right? Like that's, like if she was an adult, I'd be like, you're a close talker. And this is completely socially unacceptable. And you smell disgusting, right? Like, no. But she's a little kid, and I was just like, oh, whoa, okay, well, I'll engage with you, and I'll talk with you, but like close talking it, right? And, and so everybody started noticing this, and as parents, you're just kind of just like, that's such an odd thing. And her mom and dad just said, you know what we should probably do, because this is a little bit weird, we should probably go get her eyes checked, right? Like, and before like you people without kids judge parent, like fourth grade, unbelievable. Here's the deal. Kids do the dumbest things all the time. Like my boys, I swear to you, every day one of them runs into a wall, face first. And I'm not like thinking, oh, they need glasses. You know what I'm thinking? They're dumb, right? Like, and they're boys too, right? So they're just like, boom, and then they laugh, and then I'm just like, whatever, who cares? You'd break glasses if I gave them to you, right? Be blind, right? So that's just how it goes. So don't judge if you don't have kids. So you give it time, and you kind of massage it out, and you're like, what's really happening here? And so they're like, let's take her to the eye doctor, figure out what's going on. So they brought her to the eye doctor. Eye doctor was like, your daughter's blind as a bat. And they're like, oh, we're still good parents, right? So they're like, okay, that's great. So they let her pick out glasses, and they didn't go to like the lens crafter, fancy schmancy place in the mall that like can be like, wha-bam, glasses, you know what I mean? Like you go there and they can make them within an hour. This was one of the regular eye doctors that was like, okay, well, we will order your glasses and they'll come in a week. And so that's what they did. She picked out the frames, she picked out the lenses. She didn't want the thick ones, so they went like the fancy stuff. They ordered them and they thought nothing of it. And then a week later, they get a call from the doctor and it's like, hey, come on in, your glasses are there. We want to, size them up and make sure everything's good. So they went into the eye doctor, put the glasses on, and the response was very just casual. This is kind of a story that the family's told for years now, where at first it was just a very normal thing that she put them on, and she was like, oh, hey, Mom, okay, cool. Well, okay, like I can see, and they did the thing, and she's like, yeah, E7, F2, 5, and they're like, yeah, you have 20/20, we're great now, and that's it. So they just kind of went on with their day thinking, we saved our child from blindness, this is fantastic, and moving on. Well, what's interesting is that as they were leaving their house, they lived in Beaumar at the time, and Beaumar is just kind of like East Littleton, Inglewood. It's kind of like this little like mountain town in the middle of the city, right? There's like aspens there, and there's like real trees there, and it's a very strange little pocket in Denver. And so they were heading home, and like one of the most beautiful things took place. Her cousin started yelling at her mom. She was like, hey, Mom! And the mom's like, does what mom does. She's like, what do you want, right? And she's like, what are those? And her mom's like, what are you talking about? And like you're driving, and as a parent, you usually just make something up, right? Like this, that's what we do. I'm like, what are those? It's just a house, no big deal. I'm not even looking, right? And it's like, it's your favorite red car. Keep going. Like, so she's just saying things. She's like, no, Mom, like, what are those things? What, look. And she's like, goodness gracious, fine. So she pulls over to the side of the road, stops, and she's like, okay, honey, what's going on? And she looks over, and she goes, look at that. And so she's like, okay, she looks, and she sees a tree, and it was an aspen, and it was in the fall season. And her daughter goes, Mommy, what are those orange things on that? And her mom sat there and was like, sweetheart, those are leaves. And she's like, leaves? You mean the things that I've seen in the books that like fall down from the trees in the middle of the fall? And her mom was like, yeah, of course, honey. Every fall we go to the mountains and she started realizing that for the last 7 years, this little girl went to show her beauty and went to see, and you guys have all gone into the mountains and like you're hoping for that perfect week where you see the aspens actually change colors and then fall, right? Like it's that ideal 3-day period of Colorado that no one ever finds, right? Because it's like summer, winter, right? Like that's how Colorado is. Like, and so she's sitting there and she's like, sweetheart, we've seen, these are leaves. And then her daughter sat in the car and she had her glasses and she looked and she went, they are so beautiful. Now, as that story's been told in our family, and as I've, like, every time her aunt tells it, because it kind of comes up almost every season, like, remember that one time you were blind and couldn't see beauty, right? And she's older now. I think she's like in middle school or high school now at this point. Every time that story is told, my spirit just like, there's something inside of me that leaps for joy at this idea that she thought she knew what beauty was until her eyes were opened. And every time I hear that story, I go, I'm not so sure that there's a better picture of the gospel than that. Like if you think about what Jesus says he came to the world to accomplish for us on our behalf, the reality is that the story always begins with that we are people who think we have perfect vision, right? Like every one of us, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian in the room or not a Christian in the room, we have this default assumption of believing that what we see is real and true and right. And you think about our morals and our values, we think my view, my lens is correct. My view of right and wrong is correct. My view of my life and my future and my job and my vocation and my college and my passions and my dreams, I have a view that is absolutely correct. I even have an introspective view of my own sin that I believe I know exactly what is really going on. We all have this weird perception that's been blurred, if you will, by our own human bias. And what's so amazing about Jesus is that his invitation to us in the scriptures is not him going like, hey, you got really messed up eyesight, you should probably fix that. Is that what he does is he so often says, won't you come to me for a moment? Come near me. Let me beckon you to me for just a moment. And as we come nearer to him, and as the vision starts getting clearer and clearer and clearer, and we realize just how blind we really are, we see him for who he truly is. And all of a sudden, Jesus tenderly, yet also aggressively, because he cares about us, starts wiping away the things that we used to think we could see clearly. He takes the imperfections of our lives and he begins to wipe those away. He takes the dispositions and brokenness and sinful addictions and he says, let me wipe that out of your vision for a moment because you don't see life clearly. And he takes the things that you think you're made for and he goes, let's wipe that away so you can see me. This is what Jesus came to accomplish, to open blind eyes, to give us new vision of what life can look like in the kingdom of God. It's the beauty of the gospel. There's new sight and then there's new life. And today, we're gonna be jumping into a scene where one of Jesus's greatest enemies experiences Jesus in this way, where he thinks he sees correctly and then Jesus goes, oh no, you need new eyes, bro. You need a new way to see your life. And his name is Saul, this man who hated Jesus. And that's the kind of story we're jumping into today. So let's begin reading in Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 1. I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 so we get some context and we're understanding the characters at play here. I don't want to make any assumptions that you guys know the book of Acts or anything like that or who these people are. So we're jumping in, we'll get some historical context, and then we'll see what really takes place with Saul. So verse 1. Meanwhile, so that a word in of itself already tells us there's some stuff we need to know. So we'll get to that. So meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. It's a fancy way of saying the people who followed Jesus, Christians, Messiah followers. If they were Jews who had converted to Christianity or become believers in the Messiah, they were Messianic Jewish individuals. These were the Lord's disciples. He, being Saul, went to the high priest, verse 2, and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, the city, so that if he found any there, so he's going to Damascus because he wants to see if there are any Christians that are in this city. And so if he found any there who belong to the way, this is one of the very first proper nouns we were given of the Christian movement, the way, this group of people who believed that their way was the way to heaven, their way was the way to experience God. It was the way, the truth, and the life through Jesus Christ, right? So this is a description of Christianity. Whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. So let's stop there because we really need to understand some context and what's going on with main characters. So the very first thing we're introduced to is a guy named Saul. Now, if you've been at Lighthouse for the last couple of weeks, Saul is a pretty common character so far in the last about 3 or 4 chapters of the book of Acts. Saul is a young Pharisee. So he is a religious leader, a part of the Jewish religion. His sole responsibility and primary vocation in life is to lead people to follow the law, to be someone who worships Yahweh, the God of Israel. He's supposed to administer the sacrifices at synagogues and prayer. He's not a high priest, but he's got exceptional amount of power. And Saul, as a Pharisee, we know, was actually trained by a guy named Gamaliel. Gamaliel was the greatest Pharisee in the first century. When he died, actually, when Gamaliel died, people actually said that a love for the law has died amongst all of Israel. And Saul studied under Gamaliel. And so being introduced to Saul, there's already some historical pieces where he's a big deal. He's one of the greatest Pharisees that's kind of up and coming. He's probably in his mid-20s. And what we know of Saul is that he's not just a Pharisee, but he is a Pharisee who absolutely hates Christians. He hates the idea of Jesus. He hates this man named Yeshua who claimed to be the Messiah. And he hates the apostles, Peter, James, John, Andrew, and all these guys. He wants nothing to do with them. And one of the very first times we were introduced to him as a character in the book of Acts was actually when a guy named Stephen, one of the first Christians, is murdered on behalf of the Jerusalem council. So Stephen was preaching the gospel of Jesus in a local synagogue. Saul hated what was happening. He rallied up these troops and they started saying that Stephen was committing blasphemy. He was speaking against Moses, the temple, God himself. Those are a triple whammy in the Jewish culture of the first century. I mean, if you said something negative about Moses or about the temple or about God, you would be killed. That was a death sentence. And so Saul convinces the Jerusalem council to have this high court hearing against Stephen. Stephen is tried, he's found guilty, and Saul, along with 80 other men, murder Stephen. He's the very first Christian martyr in Christian history. And the text tells us, actually, Luke says that while these men grabbed stones, the largest stones they could find, and were throwing them at Stephen, Saul, the character we've been introduced, was sitting there holding all of these men's garments as a way of approving this murderous act. He's saying, I want to kill these Christians. And then, right after Stephen was murdered, Luke tells us that Saul, in his zeal and passion for Jerusalem and in his zeal and passion for the law of God, he actually took it upon himself he took it upon himself to go from door to door. And actually, if you look back just 2 chapters from this, you'd read about this. He went door to door in Jerusalem. And anytime there was a Jewish person who said they are now followers of Jesus, a part of the way, he would take them from their home, imprison them so that way they could be tried by the Jerusalem council and also killed, just like Stephen. So Saul is a man who wants nothing to do with Christianity, and he's a guy who will do everything in his power and beyond his own power, beyond his own authority, to kill Christians. And so we're told in Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 1, that Saul goes, okay, here's the deal. I hate Christians. I hate this movement. I want nothing to do with it. And I need to get approval from the high priest in Jerusalem because I want to go to Damascus, this other city, and I've already accomplished all the work I needed to in Jerusalem by eradicating the Christians from there and this dispersion and all this stuff. And he goes, I need to get to Damascus so that way I could start doing the exact same thing. Now, in order for him to be able to do that, the high priest would have had to sign off on something like this. You can't just go around going into synagogues saying, tell me where all the Christians are because I'm bringing them back to Jerusalem. He needed some authority. So he goes to the high priest and he gets the authority and he goes to Damascus. Now, there's a question that we should all be asking even in these first 2 verses, which is, why Damascus, right? Like, Jerusalem's a big city. Like, he's already accomplishing great things. Like, the reality is that the gospel, we know for a fact, has spread to Samaria. That was last week or 2 weeks ago. We know that the gospel has already gotten into Africa with the Ethiopian eunuch, and it's spreading all throughout Africa, which actually started the Ethiopian church movement. 45 million people today claim to be Christians because of that Ethiopian becoming a Christian. It's an incredible story. We know that Philip actually went to Caesarea, which is west of Jerusalem. So we know it's spreading. Like, it's like a virus, but it's a virus to change the world for the good, right? So why would Saul go, I need to get to Damascus? Well, I have a map, and you'll see why right here. So Damascus is up north, okay, up near Syria. And what you see is Jerusalem. You can't see it right now probably unless you guys are over here. Jerusalem is over here in the bottom corner. Jerusalem was always up above. It was in a mountainous region. And it's why everybody would always say, if you're leaving Jerusalem, you're going down to somewhere or you're going up to Jerusalem. It was like a Colorado Springs. It was just a higher elevation city. And to get to Damascus was very important. Damascus in the first century was owned by the Greco-Roman government, and Damascus was the central hub of trade and engagement between India and Asia and the rest of the known world in the Roman government. It actually had really wide roads, and it was built in such a way where it was perfect for trade and interaction. And so if something were to get to Damascus, good or bad, it could then have the potential of getting everywhere in the Roman world. Like, this was the closest thing you could possibly get to as a hub, so to speak, without going to Rome or some major metropolitan city like Ephesus or something like that. And so Saul is going, I have to get to Damascus. Now, what's interesting is that it's not just that it was a central hub of trade, but that there was over 20,000 Jews who actually lived in Damascus in the first century, which meant that there would have had to have been at least 100 synagogues that the Jews would have gone to daily for worship and prayer. So now let's put all these kind of pieces together. Damascus is a big city. It's a high trade city. There are 20,000 Jews there. There are over 100 synagogues there. And Saul knows that the Christian movement is growing faster than he can possibly imagine. And so what is he thinking in his pursuits of getting to Damascus? He's thinking, if I can get to basically the point of entry to the rest of the world, maybe, just maybe, I can stop this Christianity before it spreads. Maybe, just maybe, I can get to the 20,000 Jews that are there. And we know that the gospel goes first from the Israelites, then through Judea, Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. We know that Paul even says in the book of Romans that it was actually, the gospel was actually meant for the Israelites to then bless the world. This is the Abrahamic promise. Israel is supposed to be the genesis of the world being changed forever. And so Saul is going, if I'm gonna stop what I hate, I have to go to the enemy territory lines, and I have to fight the battle on the front lines to keep this thing from growing. So he's being a strategic individual in this moment. And so the high priest says, yes, go. Here's some papers. Go to every single synagogue, and you need to just do it. And this would have been a 125-mile journey. This would have been about 6 days on foot. And he's like, I have to go. Let's do it. So verse 1 and 2 basically sets us up for the context of what Saul's mission is. I am going to arrest Christians in the second most important city in Rome right now, hoping I can stop this thing. And what's amazing is that as he's going on this mission to stop Jesus, in fact, he actually ends up encountering Jesus. I want you to look at verse 3 here. So this is when the story really begins to unfold for us, and we see some really powerful things take place. Verse 3. As he neared Damascus, so this now, we're looking at probably at least 110 miles on the journey so far. He's getting close to Damascus. He's not in the city yet, but as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly, and I want you to underline this next phrase here, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. A heavenly thunderstorm or a heavenly blast of light took place. Something Something that we've only seen a couple of times in the entire Bible. We're talking like a Mount Sinai moment where God dwelt on Mount Sinai and thunder and lightning and Moses was up there. Or when Isaiah encounters God in a vision in chapter 6, or when Elijah actually calls down fire on the pagan altar of the gods of Baal. Like, this is an insane scenario. And so Luke tells us this massive flashing light engulfs Saul. Verse 4, he fell down to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul. There's some emphaticness happening there. He says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Verse 5, who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. Yep, sounds about right. The guy right in front of you just get knocked to the ground by this flashing light. You're hearing a heavenly voice take place, like right in front of one of probably your best friends. They're just like, what just happened, right? But there's an oddity to this scenario. They're standing there speechless, and yet they heard the sound, but they did not see anybody. So their brains are just melting, right? They're just like, I don't know what's going on. This isn't crazy. Who is Saul talking to? This is a very weird circumstance. Verse 8, Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. He was blinded. So they led him by the hand into Damascus, and for 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. So Saul gets the approval from the high priest in Jerusalem, and he's like, hey man, do what you've been doing here. Go to the synagogues, go to the houses, find every Jew that you know, find out if they're Messiah followers, imprison them, bring them back, try them, we'll get them murdered, let's stop this thing. And so he starts this 125-mile murderous mission, and he's going. And Luke tells us that right before he gets to the city, this incredible flash of light takes place. We don't know really, there's really no description other than it's just boom, just flash, hits. I don't really know how else to describe that except for exactly how I'm telling you, just a flash of light. And what happens is that Saul falls to the ground. Now, we're not sure if he's in a fetal position and he's just crying, terrified. I would have been in that moment, but maybe he falls to his knees, he covers his eyes. We don't know what happens, but we do know that he falls, he can't see, flash of light takes place. His friends are freaking out and they don't know what to do, so they're quiet. And all of a sudden, this voice from heaven begins to speak to him saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now, in that moment, two things are happening that would be tremendously confusing. One, this voice knows who Saul is. And the voice is calling his name out twice, emphatically. There's no exclamation points in the Greek that this language would have been originally written in. This means that whoever this is that's speaking to Saul is not happy with him. This is the other night, I was actually, not the other night, last night, I was downstairs and Asher and I were watching WALL-E because we have Disney Plus and we're watching every movie that Disney's ever made. And so we're watching WALL-E and I'm a little teary-eyed because WALL-E and Eva are falling in love, and then they did the little thing and I was like, oh, and in my heart, I felt some things, right? So, and my wife was probably just like, oh, my husband has feelings, and it was good. But I'm watching the movie with Asher, and Ezekiel is nowhere to be found, which Ezekiel is almost 5 and he's a boy. So that's not good. So I was like, Zeke? Nothing. That's really not good. Moms who have boys, you know what's up, right? Dads, you kind of do too. So, and I was like, my son is not responding. And I went, Ezekiel Knox-Shaw. And all I heard was, yes, Daddy? And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm coming downstairs. And I said, dang right, you're coming downstairs, right? That's what am I doing? I'm emphatically calling his name out, right? That's what Jesus is doing to Saul. He's going, Saul, Saul, but then he says, why are you persecuting me? Now Saul's going like, what? I'm persecuting Christians. I'm grabbing people who are against the law of God. They're against Judaism. They're against what we believe. They're followers of a fake Messiah. Who has the power and ability to flash a light and to speak my name with authority and call me to my knees? Who is the me? And so he asks the question that every single person in this room would ask. Who are you? Right? I don't know who you are. And he's never, this stuff doesn't happen on a regular basis, right? I don't wake up and God's like, Josh. It's like, no, it's not happening, right? So Saul is like, who are you? Now I love Jesus' response. He goes, I am Jesus, the one in whom you are persecuting. In the Greek, ego eimi Yeshua. Now, to all of us, we're going, that was a formal introduction. Like, nice job, Jesus. Like, pretty clear. Like, you're persecuting me as in you're persecuting my followers, you're persecuting the church, you should probably stop. That's really cool. But that's not how Saul would have heard this. Saul is a Pharisee. He's a Pharisee of Pharisees. He is a law-abiding citizen to the core of everything that he is. The greatest leader in Israelite history is Moses, the man who wrote the law, who heard the law of God, the man who took Israel out of Egypt and delivered them into the promised land. Every Pharisee thought, if only I could be like the prophet Moses. And what is so interesting and so beautiful about what Jesus does with Saul is he goes, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He goes, who are you? Who are you in comparison to who am I? Let's figure out this dynamic. And then Jesus says, I am, ego eimi, which is the exact same language or title that God gives himself when Moses is at the burning bush. And Moses goes, and he's talking with God through a burning bush. Very weird scenario again, right? Flames, all this craziness, right? And then Moses is told by God, he says, hey, I need you to go and set my people free, and you need to tell Pharaoh what's up. And Moses is like, I have a stutter, I can't do that. And he's like, don't you worry, because I'm gonna give you a staff, and I'm God, right? And then Moses goes, okay, but if I'm going to convince the Israelites to be delivered into your promised land, who am I supposed to tell them is going to deliver them? And what does God say? You tell them, I am. He's saying, you tell them that I am everything, that I am the creator, that I am the maker of the entire universe, that I am the creator of Pharaoh, that he is a pot of clay that I can crumble in a moment if I wish to. I am who I am, and you tell them that, Moses. And Moses goes, yes, sir, absolutely. And he goes. Friends, while Paul is maybe on his knees covering his face, and in that moment, Jesus says to him, ego eimi Yeshua, he is saying, I am Jesus, the one in whom you think is not God. And guess what, buddy? I'm God. And I'm the God that you have been waiting for. And I am the God that you have said that you are a servant of. And I am the God who wrote the law that you say you love. And yet you are persecuting me. Why is there a problem between the two of us? Now in that moment, Jesus doesn't give Saul any chance to respond at all. And if you notice, I'm getting Saul and Paul mixed up. His name ends up being modified a little bit, and he ends up being called Paul later on in the scriptures. But there's this beautiful scenario taking place where God is establishing dominance with Saul. Now he's going, I don't know what to do with this. This is ridiculous. And so Jesus tells him, okay, here's the deal. Now that you know who I am, you got some new marching orders, bro. You think you're going to Damascus to go and capture Christians? Well, now you're going to go to Damascus and you're going to meet Christ, me, the Messiah. So stand up and get walking. Now he's blind, so his buddies have to help him, but Saul doesn't talk back to God now that he knows who God is, right? So this is the scenario we're left with. Saul is being told, go to Damascus, and he'll know what to do next. And that's where the story continues. Check this out in verse 10. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. That's another way of saying that there was a follower of Jesus in Damascus. I love how Luke just kind of throws that little detail in there. He's like, Saul is trying to stop this movement from growing, but it's already too late. There's already followers of Jesus in Damascus. He would have had no hope of stopping it to begin with. But he goes and so there's this guy, this follower of Jesus, this disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, and he says, Ananias! And I love his response. Yes, Lord? It's like the total opposite of Saul, right? It's like, Ananias! And he's like, yeah, what's up? How we doing, man? Like, we talk all the time, bro. Like, we're good, you know? Like, Holy Spirit's inside of me. Like, if Jesus rose from the grave, I believe he rose from the grave, so surely God can speak to me, you know? Like, there's a super casual engagement taking place. Like, I love how just normal this whole interaction is. He's like, yes, Lord, what's going on? Verse 11, the Lord told him, I need you to go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias, i.e. you, come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Now, I want you to think about what Jesus is asking Ananias to do. He's telling him, hey, I need you to go to the house of a guy who wants to kill you, but go. Well, he's nervous, right? And that's literally how the text describes it. Look at verse 13. Lord, I always wonder how the tonality of his Lord was at this point. Before it was, yes, Lord, anything, right? Like, what are you speaking to me, Lord? And now he's probably like, Lord, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm that he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. He's like, hey, Jesus, I'm not so sure this is a good plan. Like, can we pick somebody else, please? And then Jesus' response in verse 15. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles, which means the whole world, anybody who's not a Jew, and their kings, and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Now that last sentence, I must show him how much he must suffer for my name. I honestly believe that that's just like a throw out for Ananias. Like, I feel like if I was in Ananias' shoes and I was being told, I have to go and preach the gospel to a man who hates me, who wants to murder me. God is telling me that God's gonna use this guy for his own glory and his own fame. And I'm sitting there going like, man, this seems like a little crazy. And then God goes, hey, but don't worry. I'm gonna use this man's immense suffering for my own glory. You're just like, oh, okay, good. All right, we're all right. Like, you know, I was thinking that you were gonna like show a lot of favoritism to this bro, but because he's gonna like suffer like crazy, all right, I'll go. You know, like it's like, he's a human. I mean, I would think that. Like, I mean, maybe Ananias was like super holy and he was just like, oh, don't do that to him, you know, but that's not how I think this went down, right? I think he's gonna have to suffer. And Ananias is like, yeah, all right, darn right he's gonna have to suffer. You're thinking it too. This is how it goes, right? Verse 17. Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said to him, I love this. He says, Brother Saul. He's giving him kinship before he even earns it. He says, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, he has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately, something like scales, I want you to underline that phrase, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes and he could see again. So a man that was once blind is now able to see after the filling of God's presence in his life. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. So now the story really continues to unfold in incredible ways, right? Saul goes into the city. He stays at this guy's house named Judas. Now, we're not told who this man is, but if you just think about the narrative for a moment, This is probably the house that they had originally arranged for Saul to stay at. I mean, if you're gonna try and visit 100 synagogues and try and interact with 20,000 Jews over the course of who knows how long, you need a place to stay. I wouldn't be shocked if the high priest probably was like, hey man, I got someone to hook you up with a place to stay. Don't you worry about it. He's another Pharisee. You're good to go. His name is Judas. He lives on Straight Street. It's gonna be awesome, right? So he's led by his other friends who didn't hear Jesus. I mean, they kind of sort of heard a voice, but they didn't see the light. He's led to this home, and there he waits for 3 days. He fasts, he prays, but he waits. Now at this point, his paradigm, his whole worldview of God is shattered. Like he thought Yahweh was the only God, the true God. Jesus was a fake, he was a phony. Now Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah. I mean, everything is being blown away. And then lo and behold, a door knocks, or there's a knock on the door. 3 days later, Ananias shows up and he's like, hey, so I heard that you've been having some visions of me. Ta-da! I'm here. Like that's gotta be a little weird, right? Like let's just enter into the story for just a moment. This is a very strange 3 days. He's got stuff covered, like he's blinded, he can't see, but he thinks he knows what this guy looks like. He's got these visions, and Ananias is like, super nervous, right? I mean, I can't imagine what it was like to knock on that door. And he's like, so is Saul of Tarsus here? And they're like, he is. Who are you? And he's like, I'm a follower of Jesus, and he told me to come here, right? Super weird. Walks in. And it's really beautiful. He ends up interacting with Saul, and he says, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus sent me to fill you with the Holy Spirit. Here's the gospel of Jesus. Here's the good news of Jesus. He wants to give you sight. He wants to use you. He wants to bless you. You will be a vessel to change the world forever. And then he lays his hands on him. And in that moment, these scales, or something like scales, falls off of his face, and he sees again, he gets baptized, and he becomes a Christian. Now, in of itself, if we just left the story there, right? And we were like, if we took a 30,000 foot view, like you're on an airplane, you see these things from overhead. If you were looking at this whole story for just a moment and you saw the 30,000 foot view, chances are you would interpret this the way that most of us have if you've grown up in the church at all. And it's this cool story that God will take anybody and he will save them and change them and transform them if he so chooses, right? It's a beautiful story of God taking someone who hates him and makes him a follower of Jesus. This is why Paul in his writings actually says that he was an enemy of God, that he was the worst of all sinners, and yet God used him. And so if God can choose Saul, God can choose anybody. And that's how most people read this passage. And there's nothing wrong with us taking a 30,000 foot view going, wow, that's God can literally save anybody, which means for some of you, you're going, I know I'm Saul and I know that Jesus wants to save me, so burn my eyes away. Let's make this happen and give me new life because I want to be saved. Like some of you, that may be the reality for you today. But the majority of us, we look at the text and we go, what a cool story. Well, let's keep reading because there's some cool stuff happening later on in this. I don't really know what to do with this text, right? When you have a 30,000 foot view of the scriptures, sometimes you miss some of the most beautiful things in the text. And all it takes is a little bit of digging, and you actually realize there's something beautiful happening here. Something that actually applies to all of us. I want you to look back at verse 18, just verse 18 for a minute. And I want you to see this statement again, because this one's weird. Verse 18. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. This was right after Ananias prayed for the Holy Spirit to fill him. Now that translation, something like scales, I don't know about you, but when I read that for the very first time, I was like, weird. Saul turned into Aquaman for a minute and scaly face, right? Because when we think about scales, what do you think of? You think of fish or reptiles or, some sort of creature that's not a mammal. And we're like, what a weird scenario. Why wouldn't God just have given him cataracts for a little bit and then cleaned it back up? But the reality is we're being told something like scales fell from Saul's eyes. And because we're taking a 30,000 foot view of the scriptures, we're going, whoa, that's weird. Moving on, and you keep reading, okay? And this is what we do. This is how most of us read our Bibles. But that statement, something like scales, and that word in particular, scales, is just not a helpful translation of that word because it gives you no context at all. It doesn't help us understand what the heck is going on, right? Scales, reptile, weird, it all of a sudden kind of like something like it falls off. What's going on there? Well, the reality is, guys, is that word scales, over the last about 50 years or so, we've actually discovered at ancient war kind of zones in the Roman government and the Greco-Roman government and throughout really the Greece Empire as a whole, I mean, spanning from Alexander the Great, and then when the Alexandrian dynasty kind of was destroyed and then disseminated to the 12 Roman, or the 12 generals and all of that stuff, we actually have been discovering over the last 50 to 60 years a whole bunch of non-biblical literature written in Koine Greek, which is what this was written in, that use that word all the time. Now, it's hard to find it in the Bible. In fact, it's almost never used to describe anything, and it's a weird thing, which is why Luke is like, something like it fell off. It's like, well, what does it actually mean? Well, in almost every instance outside of the Bible, this word is actually used to describe what occurs to someone's flesh after they've experienced a third-degree burn or worse. And so at the battlefield, when a flame comes up and someone's whole arm is burnt to a crisp, or when someone is a craftsman, an iron worker or whatever, and then they stick a sword in and then it comes out, but a coal touches their skin. What they would do is that medically, and this was almost always used in medical research, is that they would say that when the 3 or 4 layers of skin burn to a crisp, get down into the flesh, the nerve endings are completely dead, and yet the skin is still there, and it has that burnt, disgusting, white, black, crisp to it, where no one knows what to do, and we don't know how to fix it, and we just hope that somehow it'll just swipe away over 2 or 3 weeks and maybe new flesh comes in. They would use that word, scales, even though we don't, it's not described, or it's not translated that way. They would say that is what that is. So you're thinking, okay, hold on a second. So it's not Aquaman, right? It's not scales, fish falling from his face, because that contextually and logistic, it makes no sense in the narrative, right? Why would that happen? So you're going, okay, now I'm like thinking about this story for a moment. Saul could not see. And the moment that the Spirit of God was filled inside of him, this burnt flesh, this seared off flesh began to just fall away and he could see again. Now we have to ask the question, well, how did his eyes get burned? How could something like flesh being burned away fall off? Well, how would that take place? Well, remember when I told you to underline verse 3? Go back to verse 3 again here. This is really important to how we study the Bible, guys. We have to be comparing and analyzing and going, wait. This doesn't make quite that much sense. Look at this, verse 3. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And then right after that flash, that's when he goes blind. That's when the text says that he falls to the ground, but then he looks up and he can see nothing. So let's just put 2 and 2 together for just a moment. What happened to Saul when he experiences Jesus? He's blinded. Now how is he blinded? He's blinded by the light, right? Now you can start singing that song if you want, right? Like 3 people know that song? Okay, great. So only the older people in the church? No, like this is what's happening. The power of Jesus Christ interrupts Saul in his life when he thinks, now think about this, guys, this is how it applies to every single human. It's not just about God saving some crazy broken sinner and it's a super cool story and all that. Think about all the narrative of what's going on. Saul thinks he knows clearly, he sees clearly, he's doing everything the right way. He's on a mission and journey to do this. And on that very journey of life that he thinks is perfectly clear, Jesus shows up and he goes, you're not seeing anything rightly. Boom! I'm gonna blind you for a moment because what you're seeing is not the life that I've made you for. What you're experiencing is not the life that I've made you for. The way that you perceive life and your wholeness and your purity and everything about who you are is completely blurred by your own selfish lenses. And so I'm gonna blind you and then I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna rework your brain and how you think about me and how you think about your life and your job and your vocation and your addictions. And I'm gonna take all of that. I'm gonna make you sit in darkness for just a little bit before you come to the realization that I am the only one that can give you true sight. And in that moment, 3 days later, Ananias shows up and he says, the Lord has given me a vision to come to you, and here it is. And then he holds Saul, and in that moment, when he's filled with God's presence, instead of being dismantled before God's presence, in there, all of a sudden, the burns fall away. And he receives sight again. There's a renewal that takes place, friends. Saul was on a journey like all of us are on a journey. You may not be on a journey of a hatred towards Christianity, but you're on a journey thinking that you know exactly what's right and wrong and good and not good, and you know your problems and everybody else's problems, and your prerogative is that you see clearly. And here's the deal, you don't. You don't see the beauty that's before you. You don't see the extravagance of God's grace for you. You don't see it, yet you want it and you know you need it. I mean, Saul thought he was doing everything right for God. And it took a power encounter with Jesus. It took him wrecking his sight. It took God doing something that Saul probably thought was unjust against him to get his attention, and then he gave him new eyes to see. And then he changed the world. Friends, let me ask you this. If you were to think about this story for just a moment, if you were during worship, this is what I want you to do. If you were to think and close your eyes and imagine this whole entire scene, and you thought about, okay, Saul goes on a journey and he leaves Jerusalem and he thinks he knows where he's going. He goes to this city, but then he's blind and this thing happens, and then Ananias. If you just thought about all of that for just a moment, I want you to ask yourself the question and ask God in your heart, like, you know, like you can like count to 10 in your head kind of thing. I want you to do that and ask God in your brain and go, Jesus, where along the journey of Saul, am I? Have I been blinded by you yet and then given new life and new sight in you? Am I in a season of blindness where I still don't quite know what you're doing in my life? Am I in a season of being burned to a crisp and I'm still waiting to know what's next? Or am I thinking I see clearly and I don't see clearly at all? Enter into the text this morning and ask, where in Saul's progression am I right now? And what is the next step? And for some of you, the next step is faithfully doing what he already told you to do because he's already given you sight. So do it. Some of you feel blind and you don't know where to go, and you're now growing in impatience. And in this season, you need to wait upon him and listen to him and wait for him to reveal what's next to you, and to just wait on him, to be still. Oh goodness, how many times God says that in the Psalms. Be still, O Israel. Wait. But some of you, friends, you think you know what a tree looks like and you've never seen the leaves. You think you know what the mountains look like, yet you've never seen a summit top capped with snow. You think you know what life is like and freedom is like, but you've never experienced it because you don't know Jesus. And today, Jesus is willing and wanting to blind you so that way he can give you new sight. But are you willing to let him do that? Every one of us is on a journey, friends. And so as we worship today, go through that journey with Jesus. Walk through that progression with him and ask the question, where am I and where do you want to take me, Jesus? So I'll pray, and then one of our elders, Brian, is going to lead us in a time of response, giving in communion among other things, and we will respond to Jesus in light of this text. So let's pray together.